And then if you take, the perspective of behavioral insights that says like humans are not always rational actors, right? We'll often do things that are irrational, but what impacts those decisions are often emotions, right? So for us, it's like, okay, if we can really create toolkits and an approach to experience design that is really anchoring the senses, the sensory experience of someone, and then really thinking about what types of emotions we want them to have within that experience and within that time-bound experience, can we use that kind of insight and that knowledge to apply to different design challenges or business problems?
So what's your answer to yourself, right? Why are you doing this? Because I want to get to the piece of your journey where you took on this job at Avita, a different type of experience design,
Right.
etc.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this? And as you think back, like, how did you end up in the role that you're in today?
It's so interesting because I feel like I might end up contradicting myself, but because I did say earlier you have to let go of ego and you have to like at some point hand over the process or some of the making to other people, the communities, and trust that as well. But I think what keeps me going personally is that, and whether it's ego or not, is like I really passionately believe in the power of experiences to move people, right? Whether you want to move people to do something, to buy more, to join a cause, to vote in a certain way, to care about a certain thing. I think experiences are absolutely key to doing that, right? It's key to our well-being. It's key to how we can collaborate with each other, how we can exist in a social kind of context, and that's what drives me, right? And that I think that is a thread that is something that I've been concerned with throughout my practice and throughout my career, is that unending curiosity about how people exist, but also this belief that if we get to know people more, get to know people better, and have better tools and methods to create experiences, then we can do really transformative things. So I think that's what drives me at the end of the day. Something that I just like. I love. I love having great experiences. I love experiencing different things, but I also love the intellectual work of thinking about an experience and how can that be better, how can that be improved, or how can we do something that's been done in multiple new ways.
So how does that apply in your day to day? Right? Like, you are doing experience design for, retail partners and brands and clients,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think most of us have a vague sense, even I have a naive outsider sense of what that means. I certainly
Mm.
know that I have walked into environments and seen some of that at work. But what does this way of thinking mean in your day to day? Are you challenging the way people are designing physical spaces or interaction methods? Are you trying to get yourself inside the emotional shoes of a shopper? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question because you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people that are doing it, right? And by no means, and again, this is like what the word innovation and can be interpreted in so many different ways. For us, it's not necessarily like the next, a 10-year, 50-year horizon. This is going to be the
Yeah.
next big thing. We're talking about like deeply understanding people right now so that the services and products can be improved now and in the near future, right? That's kind of like our space, is really trying to improve the now, right, through innovation. In terms of that sense, like where we try to focus with, and it started in the museum world, but how I've translated this into the practice at Avita X Lab is really thinking about the sensory experience, right?
Mm.
So, there's a lot of, exhibition designers, architects, industrial designers, interior designers, a lot of great amazing design practitioners that think about these things. But for us, it was really trying to create a method and a systematic approach to thinking about embodied experience, our physical bodies within a space or an environment, and all the things that you could potentially interact with, right, through your senses. What
Yep.
are those things, and how do those impact how you feel physically, which is what we call like affect, and then how does emotion link to that? And then if you take, the perspective of behavioral insights that says like humans are not always rational actors, right? We'll often do things that are irrational, but what impacts those decisions are often emotions, right? So for us, it's like, okay, if we can really create toolkits and an approach to experience design that is really anchoring the senses, the sensory experience of someone, and then really thinking about what types of emotions we want them to have within that experience and within that time-bound experience, can we use that kind of insight and that knowledge to apply to different design challenges or business problems?
So, like, that is incredibly fertile ground for ideation, right? You're sitting at an intersection of constantly evolving sort of human expectations, customer expectations, but
Mm-hmm.
also, you know, ever an increasing pace of technological capabilities that are coming
Yeah.
to you, awareness of what's going on else in the world. So, you know, maybe let's make this real for the audience. Can you tell us a bit about, is there one concept or product or one kind of output of XLab that you're particularly proud of? And can you kind of tell us the story of that output?
Yeah, for sure. The first thing that comes to mind is a project that we did called Portal to the Arctic.
Okay.
And it was a prototype and concept we created for Polar Bears International. And it was a large video wall, touchscreen video wall that was interactive, with a lot of amazing like footage that Polar Bears International provided for us of like all the Arctic polar bears, Arctic environments, incredibly beautiful, right?
Yeah.
So the idea for us was like, most of us will probably cannot attend or visit the Arctic, right? It's very expensive. It's also ecologically not the best for mass tourism to happen up there, right?
Yeah.
We also know that polar bears are really endangered because of loss of their habitats and sea ice, right? Because of climate change. So there's that story, but how do we tell people? How do we kind of like scale that story to people that are in the South, right? And I'm not talking about the global South. I'm talking about just us, even in North America, that are south of the Arctic, right?
Yep.
How do we get people to understand the urgency of that story without being very didactic, without giving them facts, tons of facts, and beating them to death with with a lot of data, right? So we wanted to create this experience within the lab where primarily it's driven by different sensory stimuli, which included, the visual element, of course, an interactive element, because when we're talking about like embodied experience, it's really important for us to be quite opposite of how you would, have a situation where you're interacting with your phone or like a computer screen where you're relatively static, sitting down or standing, right, or whatever the case is. So we wanted people to move around. So we used the physical form factor of the space that we were in,
Yeah.
plus this large scale interactive video wall to get people to interact with the content in multiple ways. With some really creative editing. And what was really key, though, in terms of like wanting to think about how this mixed sensory experience really kind of like created an emotional impact, was this auditory experience that we created. So for us, after as we were going through the design process, we had this incredibly beautiful footage, like stuff you would see on Discovery Channel, National
Yep.
Geographic, that kind of stuff. So it already is really, really moving, right? But because oftentimes you can see that kind of stuff on Netflix and whatnot, we wanted to take advantage of the fact that you're physically in this space. So one of the principles that we work with is that if someone's going to take the effort to actually visit you somewhere physically, then you should also take the effort to give them a great experience, right?
Yep.
So as we went through the design process and tested the different interaction models that we created for physically interacting with the screen to get at the story, we mapped out like what the visual story and the cadence and the flow of what that could be, but it was really lacking something. And we realized, it was the auditory element, right? Because we needed sound, but like, it wasn't enough just to have like the actual environment of wind and whatnot, right? But when we think about, the deep ideation that we did going into the story, one of the stories that is not as well told or well thought about, I think, is the story of the people that actually live in the Arctic, right? Which are Inuit people,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly in Canada, right? So we wanted to ensure that there was an element of Inuit culture that was incorporated into this, right? Because we did not want to shows the Arctic as an empty space devoid of human life, because the fact is that there are Inuit populations that live up there, right? Maybe they're not shown in some of these videos, but they are there, and they're an important part of that landscape and that history and that culture. So we actually licensed some music from Canadian Inuit duo who are called Pixic, and they're Inuit sisters that do contemporary throat singing. So you can look them up, or I can
Amazing.
share a link with you afterwards. But it's really evocative, beautiful, very atmospheric sounds. And the second, like, I looked at some of their music on YouTube and some of their performances, super visceral. So even when you hear it, you can already feel it within your body. We overlaid it just in some tests with our visuals and with some of our interactions, and it would just like almost match perfectly, like barely much need for post production. And suddenly the emotional valence of like that experience amplified so much. So
Wow.
we brought that in. We licensed it to them, and they gave us permission to use their music for the piece. And it was just incredible to think that you've looked at some at a project or a product that over months and months, and after you've done that a while, it loses its shine. You kind of start to lose interest a little bit.
Sure.
But the second you added this other sensory element to it, it suddenly just energized everyone, and it completely changed the feel of it. So for me, that is like a great example of how you can approach sensory experience design, but
Yeah.
with storytelling through it, right? And storytelling is also a key element as well, right? Because retailers have been doing sensory experience design for a long time, right? Like, I mean, I think they refer to more as retail atmospherics, which
Yep.
is just the stuff around you, lighting, ambient sound, scent, and all that stuff. But for us, it's also key to have like a story component as well, right? Because we're talking about meaning here. It's not just about, I felt something and you're not going to think about it,